Hi everybody, and welcome to today's virtual tutorial. If you've seen some of these before in various different themes, you might be familiar with the setup. So if you're new though, lovely to have you join us for the session. So my name is Emma Morrissey, and for today's session I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about colour. So everything from the colour wheel, as you can see, I'll give you a basic run-through guide on this. Colour mixing, so we're going to use some watercolour and I'll talk you through that as we go along. And also colour harmony, and what that means is how colours can evoke certain emotions or thoughts and feelings, and how that can really enhance your artwork. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom out a little bit here. So to start with, I just want to talk to you a bit about materials. So I've got some watercolour paper here. You can also use mixed media paper, that will work just the same. Watercolour paper is specifically designed to take a certain number of layers of paint and a certain number of layers of water. So that's why it's ideal to use when you're painting on it. I've also got what's known as a watercolour pan set here. If you've seen some of my art tutorials before, you'll recognise this one. It's very well loved, as you can see. But a top tip I always give is that if you have been using it for a while, because these do last a very long time, and then they start to run out. If you've got tubes of watercolour paint, you can just squeeze a little bit in there, let it set and dry, then you can just reactivate it with water. So a lot of sets you'll get will look a bit like this, so they just open up. You'll have your palette on one side, and it will usually come with a brush like so, and these are what are called the individual pans. Now you can get some which are much larger than this, which have got a sort of wider variety of paints, but this is what we'll be using. So we've got our paints, we've got our paper, and I've just got a little bit of water here. So colour wheel and colour theory. So basically the main thing about the colour wheel is you can get these in pretty much any shop that will sell art materials, or you can get some really good ideas of these online just by looking sort of and looking for different images. But they can be a little bit intimidating when you're just starting off. So I want to start with the very, very basics. So you've got three main things to remember when you're looking at colour theory. So the first thing is you've got what's known as primary colours. Second thing is you've got your secondary colours. And third and final, you've got what are known as your tertiary colours. So primary colours, which you may have heard of before, are basically three specific colours that cannot be made by mixing any other type of colour. And those three colours are red, yellow and blue. Okay, so these are the three main colours that we sort of start off with. Now your secondary colours happen when you mix two of the primary colours together. So let's have a look on it on here, shall we? So if we go to the red section up here, if you were to mix yellow with red, it will give you orange, and orange will then become a secondary colour. If you were to mix red with blue, it would give you a purple colour. If you were to mix yellow with blue, it will give you green. Okay, so those then become your secondary colours: green, orange, purple. Okay, and sort of a very different tones of those colours as well. I'll talk to you more about tones, highlights and shades later on. So then tertiary colours are when you mix a primary colour and a secondary colour together. So you might get something like blue green, red orange. So let's have a look at this. Let's go to our red tab up here. Let's turn this and move over to orange. So then we get like a reddy orange colour. So it's a little bit darker. So it's not red, but it's not orange. Okay. So if you've sort of heard of a sort of greeny blue or a sort of teal colour, so let's find green and let's move blue over here. So here we go. Blue, green, we now have a greeny blue colour. Okay, that's the very, very basis of the colour wheel and colour theory. So when we move on to things like tones, so you'll have various different tones of any given colour. So usually when you're painting, what will happen is if you want to have a tone of yellow, for example, if you were to apply a little bit of grey to yellow, it would give you a tone. Okay, and that applies with any colour you're working with. If you apply grey to any colour, that will give you a tone. If you want a shade of any colour, you can add a spot of black. And if you want a highlight of any colour, you can add some white. Okay, and you can see some of this here. All right, so this is what will happen by adding white to orange. So you'll get a highlighted version of orange. Let's do this with some of the other colours as well. So here we then get sort of a highlighted version of pink, highlighted version of red, which gives us pink. Okay, so that's the basis of colour theory. So we'll do a little bit of painting in a minute, just so that we can sort of get to grips with this. And again, as you can see, there's all sorts on the back here that you can see. Here is exactly what I was talking about just now in terms of a little bit of black will give you a shade of a blue-green. So if blue-green is the colour that you've mixed by mixing green, which is a secondary colour, and blue, which is a primary, and it's given you blue-green, then a highlight of it, you mix white with this colour, and it will give you this nice highlight pale tone of it. So this pale highlight, you mix a little bit of grey with it, it will give you your tone, and then your shade will be by adding a little bit of black. Okay, sometimes highlight can also be known as tint, so just be aware of that sometimes, but you can see again here, this will be by adding a little bit of white to a colour orange. A bit of grey will give you a tone of it, and a spot of black will give you a shade of it. Okay. So before we do a bit of colour mixing, I just want to talk to you also about colour harmony. So I mentioned in the introduction, basically what that means is what colours really work well and what colours clash. So clashing colours when you're creating artwork can really catch the eye, because you think, oh, you know, they don't quite work, but it's eye-catching, so it makes you look. And colour harmony is all about that sort of ability to make colours work and harmonise. So there are also some colours that really do work very well. So we can see all these colours here, they harmonise well. And if you have a look at the opposing colours on the colour wheel, these will be sort of known as your opposites. So sometimes if you were to put green with red, that will be a bit of a clash. But as they are opposite on the colour wheel, it can also sort of give quite an interesting look if you're working with colour in general. You may have noticed this in certain colours that are used in fashion as well. Something else you'll notice about sort of the general relationships of colour is what colours actually represent. So if we think about how colour is used, if you are thinking about it in terms of things you might notice and look at every day, for example, if it's quite a nice sunny day outside and you're in the garden, you might notice that a lot of the products you'll be using from a garden centre, for example, the logos and advertising on the products will probably be green. because green is used a lot to represent nature. Blue, for example, is usually representing trust. A sort of royal deep blue, as you may notice by the term royal, it's used to give that sense of regal, royal, something which is good quality. Again, as I said, just looking at colours in everyday life, if you see the colour red, usually that is meant to grab your attention. It's a very bright colour. So again, we see that a lot for emergency symbols, for stop signs, something to grab your attention. Yellow will probably be used for something that is fun. So colour is used to represent and to evoke feeling and emotion. So it's always worth just thinking about that when you're using colour in artwork. Purple is also used to denote quality. Sometimes it's used in sort of perfume, jewellery, sort of high-end things. Sort of the blues and purples tend to be used in that. So you may notice that when you're out and about. So let's get into some colour mixing. So I mentioned to start with your 3 different sections. So primary colours. Let's start with yellow. And then you've got red. And then blue. Okay. So again, as I mentioned before, by mixing 2 of these colours together will give you your secondary colour. So let's put a little bit of blue down. You'll notice I'm washing my brush each time as well. I'm going to mix a little bit of yellow with this and see, look, we get green. Okay, so then let's put a bit of red. Let's mix a bit of yellow with that, and that will give us, you guessed it, orange. And let's mix a bit of red with a bit of blue, which will give us purple. Okay, and these are our secondary colours. I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so that you can see this a little bit clearer. There we go. And then again, for your tertiary, which are your 3rd colours, we're going to mix 1 primary with a secondary. So let's go with yellow. I'm going to do a bigger square here just so you can have a clearer indication of the colour. And let's mix it with a green. So this will be sort of a yellowy green, sort of a lime green colour we're getting now, aren't we? Let's do that again. Let's do a blue. And I'm going to mix a orange over in this little section here. So I'm going to do a bit of yellow. So I could mix it in my palette, but I'm going to do it on here just so, because I think you'll get a clearer idea of it on the paper. So I'm just going to pick up some of this and I'm going to mix this into, there we go. So we're getting sort of a also by sort of doing this in different quantities, you can see the one up here, which has got a lot more orange than blue, you're getting more of a sort of a brown here really, but down here it's still on the sort of blue, green, teal sort of colour. Okay, and also as I mentioned, you can do different tones and different shades. So let's do a little experiment with that. Let's do yellow here, and then let's do yellow again. So I'm going to do 3 lots of yellow on here, and then I'm just going to show you the different. So what I'm going to do is, I've got my water here, I don't know if you can see it, there you go, just so you can see what I'm doing when I move my hand out of shot. So I'm going to add a little bit of white now, so this is going to give a highlight or tint. Okay, so I'm going to load up the brush with white. Alright, so that gives a highlight, or in some cases a tint. Right, and if I mix a little bit in here, just to give a little bit of a sort of grey tone here, I'm going to mix that in there, and that will give me a tone. Okay, and then again I'm going to mix the smallest amount of black in here, because you only want a small amount because black does tend to take over quite a bit. So I'm going to just put a little spot. I've got tiny amount in there, so that has given us shade. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this in pen just so that you can see a little bit clearer. So these here are our primary colours. These here are our secondary colours. These are our tertiary. And then here, so if we add white equals highlight or tint. I'm going to have to go off the page over here a little bit. Apologies for that. Add grey will give us a tone, and then add black equals shade. Okay. So this is a real basic sort of beginning starter point of starting to think about the colour wheel and how colour works. I'm just going to zoom back out a little bit. Okay, so as I said, you can buy these in sort of art and craft shops. You can probably get them online as well, but you can also find various bits and pieces online just to give you a basic run through. Right, just going to add, so these are our third tertiary colours. Okay, and again, as I mentioned earlier, when you're looking at sort of complementing colours, you will be looking at sort of a colour up here and then one opposite the colour wheel. So they do complement well, of course, depending also on the tones and highlights you have of those colours. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes if you've got sort of a tone of red which isn't quite as vivid, or a shade of red, so of course it will look a little bit darker. Let's move it like that so you can see. So if you were to have a shade of red, it would be a bit darker, and then if you were to have that with a bright green, then it's still complementing, but it's not as obvious. Whereas if you have a bright red with your complementing opposite the wheel bright green, then it in some ways could appear to be a sort of bit of a conflicting colour. But the general idea is anything you've got opposite the colour wheel is complementing. Okay, but as I said, that's where things can get a little bit more interesting when you start thinking of sort of tints / highlights, tones and shades of colour. Okay, I hope that has made some sense to you. I hope that it's been helpful and given you a little bit of an indication on how to start thinking about colour and mixing colour as well. As I said, we've got our primary 3 colours here, which cannot be made by mixing any other colours, so these are always the ones we start with. Then by mixing 2 of those together will give you your secondary, and then by mixing a primary and a secondary will give you a tertiary. Something else I will quickly mention is you may have heard of colours that are known as warm or cool. So of course your warm colours, you may have guessed, are up here, sort of your reds, oranges, yellows, and then as we start moving over here to the greens and blues, sort of darker blues and purples, and we're getting sort of on the cooler aspect of things. Okay, so I hope you found that helpful, and I will see you again soon for another virtual session.